Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. Welcome once again to Sense and Response webinar series. Super excited to be doing this. We took a couple of months off since our last one. We had the holidays and we had, the ramp up in January, but we're super excited to be back this month with another fantastic webinar. We're glad that you can join us here. Joining me today is Audrey Crane, who I'm hoping can start her video.
Yes.
Excellent. Fantastic. We had some technical problems in the rehearsal, but there's Audrey. Audrey's joining us. Hey, Audrey, how are you?
Good, thanks. How are you, Jeff?
I am well. I know it is the beginning of your day in California. It is the end of my day here in Barcelona, Spain. So I can tell you from the future that it's been a really good day. So,
Fantastic. Thanks so much.
It's a great way to start the day by me just letting you know that it's going to be a fantastic day already. We're super excited to have Audrey here. Audrey is a veteran design leader and a designer, and the material that she's been putting together for her new book, What CEOs Need to Know About Design, is what we're going to share with you today, which is really about really how everybody seems to get the sense that they need design, that they want design, but actually finding an organization where design is a strategic player in the organization, where designers have a seat at the table, where they're having meaningful impact, is still sadly not, it's not the default. It's still the goal for many organizations. So we're going to talk about that today. A couple quick words before we start on this. I'm Jeff Gothelf. I'm one of the founders of Sense and Respond Press. You can see all of our books at senseandrespondpress.com. But the slide that's up on the screen right now is a really good indication of the kinds of books that we are publishing. Most of these books are out. In fact, the Government Fix just soft launched in the last week or so. Audrey's book, What CEOs Need to Know About Design, is coming out soon. Our last webinar was with Elena Estilleros, and she's finishing up The Invisible Leader, the Agile Facilitation book. And so we're getting all these out there. If you're interested, hop on over to senseandrespondpress.com. You get a sense. These are short books focused on very practical, tactile information for leaders and aspiring leaders. So that's us. On the next slide, you'll get a sense that really more specifically about the book that Audrey's writing for us. What CEOs Need to Know About Design. And if you're looking to get more details about the book to find out when it's going to come out, we've got a bit.ly link, Design for CEOs, so bit.ly/Design for CEOs. If you go there, you'll get to our landing page. You can sign up to find out when Audrey's book is going to be coming out. And with that, I've neglected to properly introduce Audrey, so I'm going to do that now. So Audrey Crane is joining us from California, and then I'm going to tell you all about her, and then I'm going to shut up and let her do all the talking. Audrey is a partner at Design Map, where they design complex digital products for B2B clients like Docker, Salesforce, Schwab, and eBay. She started in tech nearly 20 years ago at Netscape as an executive producer at Netscape. That's funny. I started roughly about that time at AOL. So.
We worked together then.
Yeah, it's in some capacity. I'm sure our paths crossed even 20 years ago. For 6 years, she worked at Dubberly Design Office with clients like Sun and Palm, Stanford, Revolution Health, which is an AOL founder spinoff, I think, as well, right? So
yeah.
Interesting, small tech world, even in the U.S. and Opsware. She's also served as vice president of design at the Magellan Network, where the team won the Nielsen Norman Group's top 10 Best UI Awards. Audrey studied math, English, and theater, an interesting combination during her undergraduate work. She studied design at UC Berkeley and the California College of Arts. You can always find Audrey on Twitter at Audcrane, AUDCRANE. Before I hand over fully to Audrey, three things actually I want to point out before we get started. Thing number one, if you have questions for Audrey, please put them in the Q&A module. At the bottom of the Zoom interface, there is a Q&A module. At least that's where I see it on my screen. If you have any questions that you'd like Audrey to answer after her presentation, please put them in there. If you put them in the chat, I will find them there too as well, but I try to keep track of them in the Q&A module. So please do ask questions. We've got lots and lots of time for that. Second, we have a hashtag for this. So if you are tweeting about this, I'll put it into the chat right now. It's hashtag design for leaders. So if you're tweeting about this, please use that hashtag. That'll help us track the conversation. And then lastly, if you signed up but you have to leave early, or for some reason something happens, we are recording this and we will post it to the Sense and Respond Press YouTube channel as well. So if you go to YouTube and search Sense and Respond Press, you'll find our YouTube channel and we'll post it there. Okay. And so with that, I am going to give it over to Audrey to run the presentation for the next 15 minutes or so. I'm going to mute and hide myself. And if, like I said, please don't hesitate to drop some questions into the Q&A module. Okay. Audrey, it's all yours, and I'll see you on the other side of this.
Thanks, Jeff. Clearly we have not had enough beers, because there are more paths crossing than we knew about in the last years. So we'll have to remedy that soon.
That's my favorite number. Ha ha
ha. Thanks so much. I told Jeff a week ago, I think, that I had the nightmare where you go to school without your pants on. But in my nightmare, Jeff was introducing me while I was madly creating my first slide to share with you guys. So I'm really glad that nightmare didn't come true here today. So we're going to talk about what CEOs need to know about design just for like 15 or 20 minutes, and then we'll turn it into conversation and question. But I wanted to explain the genesis of this book. So this guy with the big smile calls us at Design Map a couple years ago, and he said, so I'm the CEO of this company. It's about 200 people. I came up through engineering, so I understand technology. Over my time here and through various studies, I've learned what I need to know about running this business. I understand operations and finance and HR. I get marketing. I definitely understand sales. It was a sales tool. I think you can tell by his smile. But I don't understand design, and I know that it's really important. That's what I keep hearing, is like design is the thing to make businesses successful, but I don't know what I should know or how I should learn it. So I'm wondering if you guys can help me. And I thought, holy smokes, I wish more people called and asked this question, but also, like, what do I tell this guy? Like, he doesn't want to learn Sketch or Photoshop, right? We're not going to send him to General Assembly. We kind of wish all business leaders were asking us this question. And if they did, what might we say? So this book is put together to answer that question. And I started the work by reaching out and contacting a bunch of business leaders who were great design advocates and asking them, what do you know, how did you learn about design, and what do you think design is, and what is it for? And it was really interesting to talk to them. This isn't exactly the folks, there's a designer in there that'll be offended if he's on the call. But what was really interesting is that they might have be really true believers in the way that they would say, look, my last company got acquired. I don't think that would have been possible without the great design team that we had. And they could talk really knowledgeably about what that design team brought to the table. And then in the next breath, they'd say, well, of course, all of our product managers have balsamic and make a lot of wireframes. And because, you know, the designers only work for the first month on the product and then they go away or something like that. And feeling like that was actually ideal. And so it was interesting to watch, to kind of see this pattern of like gaps in people's understanding of design, or at least what I wish they understood about design. So that's kind of the genesis of this book. And so I think there's probably a lot of designers on the call, because the people that follow Jeff and I are probably mostly designers, and there's going to be some 101 level stuff in this book and in this talk, but hopefully it creates a level kind of understanding of design that is something you might want your the business leaders that you work with or the CEO that you work with to have. So today I'm going to talk about what I'm talking about when I talk about design, and then 3 common mistakes that I see, and one kind of not exactly one tip, but a set of tips, and then we'll switch to questions. So I almost put the like what you talking about, Willis, slide up here, but then I thought, I don't know if that is every culture understands that, but basically when I'm talking about design, whether your business sells to consumers, so it's B2C, or it sells to businesses, B2B, there's a customer, a person, a user at the end who engages with your digital products. And in fact, they engage with your company writ large. So somebody in the company is making decisions about what people want to do, what those customers want to do, how to prioritize the things that they want to do, what data and functionality should be available to help them, and then the series of screens that best make that possible. And so that's what I think of when I think of design. So the intentional crafting of another person's experience. So often when people think of design, they're really thinking just about what you can see, especially in digital products. They're thinking about just fonts and colors. But there's kind of this whole other world, right? There's the work up front to map out what the big ideas are and which ones you want to tackle. But if you really want to make an impact, I think it makes sense to be intentional about the entire experience rather than just on the surface side, like just a button, or on the strategy side, just a big idea. So a designer's job is to elicit intent from both the businesses and the customers or users or people, depending on where you are in that Twitter fight right now, to elicit intent and then to design within constraints to optimize for both of them. So this model is from Jesse James Garrett. It's usually vertical, and there are new models, perhaps even more refined models, but what I like about this model is that it's really foundational. Like every designer knows this, and if we're trying to create a shared vocabulary and understanding with business leaders, I think it's nice if we can all know this basic model, and it does a good job of explaining that design isn't just surface and it isn't just strategy. So most often design for software is split into 2 main areas. First, there's designers working with a product team to come up with big ideas, hopefully, about how your company's technical capabilities can be leveraged to help users, so that's scope. And then they create structure through things like workflows to describe how the product actually helps them, and then organize that information and functionality into a series of screens. And that work is called interaction design or user experience design. It's very funny to imagining like at least 50 designers on the other side saying, no, it should be called something else, or it should encompass other things. But if we're just, again, trying to create a shared baseline of basic information, then I think most people will agree that this is okay. So then ultimately those screens have to be presented in a way that enhances the user's understanding of the information and the functionality available and upholds brand standards, right? And this work is called visual design or interface design. So where one was interaction, how it acts, then we have interface, how it looks, or more often visual design. This is most akin to graphic design, but not exactly the same. So that's kind of what we're talking about. And now I want to switch to the 3 mistakes. So when I work with clients who are going digital, which is everybody, right? Because digital transformation, or building software products, and maybe that's their bread and butter, I see 3 pretty common mistakes and misperceptions. First, there's a disconnect between what they think design is for and the real opportunity to move the needle for the business. Second, a misperception that it's just colors and fonts. And third, drastically understaffing the design team. So I'm going to dive into those a little bit more. With regard to the first, a disconnect between what they think design is for and the opportunity to make their business more successful. There's just tons of data to show that design makes companies more money. And at the end of the day, and both top line and bottom line. And so I'm sure that most people have seen these, but I just kind of wanted to collect them all in one place. So there's this kind of, it's almost an old chestnut at this point from the Design Management Institute, this design value index study that shows that design-centric companies outperform the S&P 500 by more than 200%. There's a couple more good ones. So more recently, there's this McKinsey report on the business value of design. So for all of these things, they usually create an index. So they say, here are the criteria by which we're going to call a company like a design-centric company or at a certain level of design centricity. And then they kind of look at those companies' performance over time and they see how they do. So obviously, we see an increase in revenue, total return to shareholders. There's lots more stuff in this McKinsey report. And then there's Forrester, the total economic impact of IBM's design thinking practice. So here they actually did a deep dive into IBM, which has been investing significantly in design. And they looked at the ROI in design over the last 3 years. They saw a 300% return on investment. And the thing I love about this report is the index is really rich. There's lots of great data in there if you want to flip to the back and dive into the numbers. And this one stands out for me. It just makes me cringe. So 10% is the number of projects that returned no profit or never reached the market before this investment in design. I'm not sure why they call it design thinking at IBM, but it encompasses design writ large. So the number went from 10% to 2%. So that means that before, 8% of all the stuff that IBM was building was not reaching the market or was not profitable at all. And if ever there was an argument to get engineers on board with getting designers on board, I think that this would be it, that the fact that 8% of their blood, sweat, and tears is completely wasted because either it wasn't well designed, it wasn't tested with the market, it wasn't agile enough. So that's a good one, but there's a lot more good detailed numbers in the back of this study. And then most recently, there's this Envision report. And Envision actually surveyed 2,200 companies, and then they ranked their maturity level based on how design was used in the organization. And so at the highest level, companies who had design most integrated said that design had a positive impact on revenue, cost savings, valuation, and there's a bunch more stuff in here. I don't know. It seems like this black background with a pink and purple illustration is the way to make these reports. I don't know. So so that's kind of it. And once I start to share with business leaders some of these numbers, and it seems like a new report coming out every couple of months, they start to understand, oh, okay, it's not just design because design is the new black, it's design because it's gonna really substantially move the needle for our top and bottom line. And so it changes the quality of the conversation, and designers don't have to demand that they're important so much anymore when the numbers are proving it. So the second one is the misperception that design is just colors and fonts. And I was actually just having lunch with Peter Merholtz, and he was telling me that he feels like the most common mistake is that people either think it's like colors and fonts or it's design thinking, but it's not kind of this whole thing. And it's pretty amazing how pervasive, especially the colors and fonts thing is, given that interaction design has been around for about as long as Jeff and I think I've been working in tech for about 20 years. So you can imagine how just addressing one or the other or kind of bookending these kind of short changes the value of the work that's happening. And I think it's important to pause here and note that it's very rare to find a designer who can do all this stuff. So it's another thing that I talk to business leaders about is if you post an ad and you say, I want a designer who can do interface design, interaction design, I want them to be able to do marketing design and logo, and they should, make our business cards, you're kind of showing the world that you don't totally get it. So it's pretty rare that you're going to get somebody who can do all this stuff. So anyway, my point is that addressing just one or the other of these short changes the other. And the thing is, like, not that shit happens, but like design happens, right? nearly all the time in software, even if, I mean, really, nearly all the time in software, even if there's no design team per se, there is still plenty of design going on. It might take the form of product managers making wireframes or of screens in PowerPoint or Balsamic, or business analysts writing long requirements documents. Sorry, mom, I know. Or engineers working and doing the design themselves as they go. Sorry, dad, I have my business analyst mom and my engineering dad on the call, I think. But so there's people doing design, right? It goes without saying, though, that just because someone knows how to use PowerPoint or Word or knows JavaScript doesn't mean that they're trained or skilled in the best ways to design software, any more than my driving to the supermarket qualifies me to drive for NASCAR. That's a nice illustration that probably, or a nice animation that probably looks terrible on the webinar, but you get my point. So given that design is happening, the critical question is whether the design work is being done intentionally by skilled designers who add value to your product or your business or not. I don't know why my slide is not moving forward all of a sudden. That animation killed everything. And that was the end of that point. So I'm gonna just escape out of presentation mode and see if we can do this again. Here we go. So design is happening, and it's just a question whether you're really intentional about the design work that's happening and using skilled designers so that you ensure your greatest opportunity for revenue and cost savings or not. So finally, I see companies all the time who hire one designer and declare that they have design, no matter what they're building, no matter how many engineers they have. And this isn't true any more than hiring one engineer would mean that you have engineering, right? Different designers have different skills, and a design team should have the capacity at least to touch nearly everything a user interacts with. So a ratio is somewhere between 1 and 5, or I think probably more commonly 1 and 8 designers to engineers is about right. That varies, of course, depending on the type and the complexity of the product. So that's it for the 3 mistakes. And then I kind of have this set of tips on giving feedback. I'm surprised. So sometimes when we work with our clients, with the business teams, we say, okay, we've got a kind of a list of topics that we could address or help with, and you guys vote and let us know what you most are interested in talking with us about, kind of outside of or alongside our projects to make the projects more successful. And I'm surprised at how feedback always comes to the top of the list. I don't know why. I'm curious if other people have thoughts about that. I guess one thing is that it happens in a group. And another thing is, I think that people feel like they need to have a really solid knowledge of design, right? So you're like in a group setting and you're the business leader, that's, you know, the CEO or a VP or a very senior person, and you don't know about design. And all these people are watching you talk about it. You know, we wouldn't have an engineer come in and show a bunch of code and expect the CEO to know about that. So maybe this is why, but certainly we want people's feedback. So sorry, I noticed this button keeps coming unbuttoned. I should have put a safety pin or something. Okay, so so I wanted to emphasize one thing before we talk about feedback, which is that initial direction, I think, is what's most important for designers to get from business leaders. So my mentor, Hugh Dubberly, talks about feed forward as opposed to feedback. So these ideas, vision, goals, a conversation about desired impact and outcome, feed forward before the design work even happens. So initial direction can take many forms, but ultimately, if a business leader's job is to bring the very best that the designers have to offer to the table, then those designers need to be engaged. And the better that a business leader can describe a picture of their vision and the outcome they're seeking, the more successful they're going to be. But at some point, the designer's going to make something, and you're going to be called on to assess the work and give feedback, right? And if you're worried that you need to know something about composition or color, I don't think you should be. There's a couple of tricks to doing this effectively. It's almost like cheating once you figure it out. So first and foremost, at the beginning of feedback sessions, designers should help everyone by recapping how they got to this point and then explaining what you're doing today and specifically why, what feedback you're looking for and what feedback you're not looking for. So you might say, I am interested in feedback on whether this successfully helps people accomplish this task. I'm not really worried about colors or typos at this point. If you don't provide this, if the designer doesn't provide this, then the business leader should ask for it. And the risk of not doing that is that the designer shows something and then the business leader might say, oh, I love that color blue. And the designer's like, what the, I don't care about the blue. That wasn't what I was asking for. But if you wait until you show the work before you explain what kind of feedback you're looking for and not looking for, then you seem kind of defensive when you say like, oh, the blue, forget about the blue. That's not, and the business leader looks kind of, not great for giving feedback on something that they didn't need feedback on. So you might sound defensive, they might sound clueless. So teeing it up is really important. And I think business leaders should ask for things to be teed up this way. I have never seen this happen in the wild without prompting, where a business leader says, what are you looking for? What are you not looking for? So after that, then we'll look at, and then the designer at the end of the meeting should say, here's what we'll do next. So here's the next thing that's going to happen. So secondly, help designers manage the feedback process. This whole feedback wrangling thing is actually really complicated, and it's generally not something that designers are taught in school. So dealing with lots of people who are all weighing in with strong opinions can be really difficult. If your designer isn't good at this, then what you end up with is design by committee, the old design by committee, which takes like something that might be really interesting and rubs off all the interesting bits until you just have this like ball of mush that nobody could think of anything critical to say about. So that's not necessarily the best outcome. So please help the designer by making sure that they have a chance to talk about, by asking them, what did you think? Why did you do it this way? What other things did you try? Especially if they're quiet, which sometimes they are, because they're spending all day in front of a computer. And then secondly, help them limit the team to the people that will provide uniquely important feedback. It's really easy for someone to say, oh, I'd like to come to that meeting, and then pipe in with their opinions, and pretty soon you end up with 10 or 12 people in the room. And sometimes that's necessary. Sometimes there really are 10 or 12 people with a unique perspective that really will bring something valuable to the feedback session. It's the flip side of that coin is very difficult for a designer to say, I don't think we need you in the feedback session. So one way that we can ask business leaders to help make sure that the design is moving quickly and is as good as possible is by asking business leaders actually to help manage the number of people that are in those sessions and making sure that they're the right people. Finally, remember that this isn't about you. It's not about your knowledge of design. It's not even exactly about your opinion, right? It's about being a partner that gets the best work from your designers. And when you stop worrying about forming and conveying your own opinion, and instead you focus on the intent, you open up the designer's training skills and abilities. So you asking, who's using this? Why are they using this? In what context are they using this? How did the designer arrive where they did? What else did they try? Why did they pick this one to show? Almost like a Socratic method of feedback can have a bigger impact than feedback, where you're just saying your opinion. Now, of course, a business leader's opinion is going to be formed by the needs of the business, their understanding of users. So I'm not saying you're not allowed to have an opinion, but I am saying if you're concerned about giving feedback and your goal is to get the best from your designers, this a series of questions can be really, really productive. And finally, it's okay for something to seem good. Like at some point, kind of letting it go and saying, I feel like we understand each other, we have the same understanding of intent, we're moving on the right path. I don't know, looks great to me, rather than feeling forced to say something about design just because the team felt obligated to ask you, especially later in the process. I meant to skip that slide. Sorry. I meant to skip this whole section because that's it. I just want to thank Chuck Moore, one of my partners who provided a lot of help with this, and also Eddie Shea, who is an amazing design coach that used to be a designer for us, who helps with the illustrations. So I think that's all, and we can switch to questions.
Awesome. Audrey, thanks so much. That was great. Good insight. And hopefully some food for thought for the folks. The nice thing is that people have started populating the Q&A module with lots of questions for you. So without any further ado, I'm going to start to work through those questions, and hopefully, well, let's see how it goes. And again, folks, if you've got questions and you're putting them in the chat, I can see them, and I'll certainly get them answered. But if you put them in the Q&A module, that's actually where I'm tracking. That's like my backlog, if you want to use the agile term here. So, but I do see them in the chat as well. So we'll start over here in the Q&A module. So first question's up, okay? And you talked a lot about the ROI of design for companies. There were a few different charts, the pink and black charts.
Yes.
Of design ROI, right? Sean wants to know, how do you associate the design work with the company's ROI? In other words, how do you know that it's the design work that moved the needle? Right.
Yeah, each of those reports do that in a different way. So it depends on which methodology, which company is using. I think so if I were you and I was planning to share one of those reports with one of my business leaders, I think the first thing that I would do is try to understand my own company metrics, where we're doing well, where the company is like set goals that are higher, and they're working hard to achieve them. And then I would kind of look for a parallel in the report, and then I would focus my effort on that thing, right? So it's kind of about connecting the dots, right? Like, your business has business goals, and there's these reports that describe how people achieve business goals. And so the question is, like, what's your company's business goal? Which report best matches that? And then what work can you do to kind of connect those things, or to make an argument that you can connect those things? And I mean, what do you think, Jeff?
Well, I mean, look, the example that I think most designers have heard by now, and the one that comes to mind is, I think it's Jared Spool's $300 million button story, right? Where they talked about simply rearranging the position of certain buttons increased the task completion rates, which ultimately led to revenue and sales going up, right? So I think I think ultimately that's how you tie this in, right? You say, look, we took a workflow that currently delivers this much ROI, whatever that is. And that ROI could be sales, it could be productivity or efficiency. I was talking to a team today, I was working with a team earlier today, and one of the things that they were struggling to quantify was this exact thing, this ROI of their design efforts. And they were working on a tool for internal teams. And I said, look, and specifically it was customer service, right? And so organizations, particularly this is a large organization, right? They know exactly how much every customer service call costs, right? What's the average duration, what it costs us to answer it, right? And so if you can prove that you improve, if you can show, right, through analytics that you solved a problem in the application, in the software, that then reduced the number of calls to the call center, you can directly quantify that in dollars, euros, whatever currency you're using, right? To say, look, we've reduced the call center call volume by 12%, right? And that adds up to $50,000 a month or whatever it is. And so I believe there's always a way to quantify the benefits, right? I think it's isolating, compartmentalizing the impact of design that becomes a challenge. Yeah. But if the work is simply to, but if you can find those compartmentalized areas where there's a workflow that's delivering X amount of return on investment today, and then we change the design of that workflow, and now it delivers X plus Y, that's a good way to do it.
Yeah, and I think that the key, right, is for designers to kind of be business-minded about their approach, right? Like I think the $300 million button is e-commerce, right? So if you have a B2B tool, don't show up with that story and say, look how important I am, right? Because you're kind of missing the boat. And similarly with the call center thing, like, look at the top 3 calls, the reason for the top 3 calls. Those call centers totally have that, right? And then like take small steps towards real measurable impact that people understand well. So similarly with those reports, like bring ones or data that feel relevant to your company.
Yeah.
Don't just email over the IBM Forrester thing and say like, oh, you should read, it's like 30 pages. So
Right. Cool. Next question. Why do you think design in general is being neglected normally in the agile world? And what do you suggest to show the value it brings to make those outcomes a reality? So why do you think, what's your take on the challenge of integrating design and agile and maybe ways to improve that?
I mean, this is kind of a old and interesting conversation though, right? Cooper has weighed in strongly, as Alan Cooper is wont to do. I personally have come to a place where I believe that it's really just a question of teams working, engineering design teams, along with product working really well together. And that there's a couple of ways to do agile right. I think Jeff Patton says the only way to do it wrong is to get dogmatic about it, or he has like a better way of saying that, like a very pithy way of saying that. And so I think if design is getting shortchanged in an agile process, I don't think we should be blaming the agile process at that point. I think we're kind of past that, right? There's something about the way that design is being valued, or the way that the design and the engineering team in particular are working together or not working together. So I kind of think we have to stop blaming agile, like, and the idea that like either agile is bad for design or we're not doing agile right. And we need to start thinking, and it's hard to write and talk about, because what I'm saying is that what's going to be right is going to be different for different companies. In fact, I think what's going to be right is going to be different even within different teams. And this is maybe why Marty Kagan really advocates for teams to stick together for the long term, because they figure out these like little fine details of how they work together, how they bring the best that everybody has to offer to the table. So it's kind of, I don't know if that was cheating or a non-answer, but I think we have to look beyond that kind of agile problem with design being valued, personally.
Yeah, I agree as well. I think at this point, nearly 20 years into the Agile Manifesto, and certainly the wide adoption, we have to figure out how to work together, right? I mean, I used to blame it on Agile being birthed by tech, right? Software engineers invented it on a mountain somewhere.
Yeah.
And
not you, I think, actually.
Yeah. but no designers were there, right? And so that we could blame on that forever, but the reality is that it's here to stay for a while, at least until the next big management flavor comes along. And what Marty says, I've seen firsthand as well. The teams that I've worked on and worked with that have stuck together for a while, I've learned to build a shared vocabulary, a shared understanding of how they work, who does what, their limitations, their strengths. They make it work ultimately because they trust each other. And I think the more the teams trust each other, the easier it is to collaborate, and the easier it is to let the recipes go. Right. And I've seen that firsthand as well.
Totally. And you can't, and the way to make it not work is to try to create a recipe out of that team, like codify it in some way, and then put it on a different team and say, this is how you guys, right? Which is why Agile is a framework of guidelines and not a list of strict rules and processes.
Yeah. And that's always interesting too. It's okay. This secret sauce that this team has, and then how do we replicate that? And that's the whole scaling conversation that gets involved, and it just gets uglier from there.
Yeah. Well, you're making me think of what's that Google, there was an interesting Google like report or white paper or something about great, like high performing teams.
Oh yeah. I do remember that. Yeah.
And I think trust was one of the integral things, and that they were sticking together for the longer term. And so maybe that's a place to look.
Yeah, it works. Let me ask you this question, because I've seen this in my career. I hear this question a lot, and I'd love to get your take on this. Question is, do you see an overlap between the roles of product manager and product designer?
Totally. Yep.
Yeah.
Yes. you can imagine, I was, when the business leader, I think he was a CEO, said, oh, we have product managers making wireframes all the time. And I was like, what? Like, we just had 45 minutes worth of conversation about how important design was. And you have what? So, so the example, I said, why? And the example he gave me was, well, we had a screen that was going to take a long time to load. And like I said, the designer team was gone, had moved on, and didn't know that that screen was going to need, that there was going to need to be a loading screen that existed. And so we just had the product managers do wireframes. I don't love that. Like, to my point earlier, right? Like, design happens, and I can't remember who said the alternative to good design isn't no design, it's bad design, right? So do you want somebody who's skilled at doing that, who's trained at doing that, who's experienced, or do you want somebody who's not? But interestingly, I gave a talk a couple years back to a product management group about, and I was trying to answer the question, like, what is the right input from product managers to designers? And I had worked with a product manager that I loved in San Diego. She's fantastic. And what I saw from her was that she was really bending over backwards to try to not be prescriptive to the designers. So something really simple, like, and then they click and the data gets returned and they see the next screen. And she could have just said that in her story or requirement document or whatever. But instead she was like, well, there's some way by which the information might change on the screen. She was really such a great advocate for design, and she was kind of killing herself to do that. And it felt silly to me. So anyway, I contacted, 40 designers, and I said, what's the best requirements in any form? Don't care, like story, requirement, purity, whatever, like that you've ever received. And I looked at what I got back for patterns, and I wish I could tell you, like, oh, there was this very clear pattern, but there wasn't actually. The clearest pattern was that there was no pattern. And I think it kind of gets back to the question of agile, right? And teams working well together. The right input from a product manager depends on the product manager, how well they understand the domain, what their experience and training is, and it also depends on the designer and what their capabilities are and what they really want. So there is overlap, and I would like some kind of like neat, like, well, this is where it should stop. And I kind of want to say, like, don't draw stuff, if you're a product manager. But at some point it gets silly, right? If that's the best way to describe intent, then, or if your designer works really well with that, then you should draw stuff. So I do think there's overlap. And I think that figuring out and untangling that overlap is a really interesting question that we are nowhere close to solving unless it's an individual solution.
Yeah. And again, I think this comes back to our previous answer as well. I think that designers and product managers that don't trust each other spend more time defining the boundaries between their Venn diagrams.
Yes.
Than designers and product managers who do trust each other. They care less about that. Mm-hmm. Right. I've had fantastic whiteboard brainstorming sessions with product managers and engineers where everyone's picking up the marker and erasing and doing things together because we trusted each other. We've been working together for 6 months on the same problem, really trying to figure it out. But until then, that takes time, and it takes commitment, and it takes patience, and but until that point, we do need. I think you're right. I think we need some kind of an initial boundary that eventually will blur.
Yeah. And I think, well, two things. One is, I think if you feel confident that you're valued, then, like, let's imagine the designer feeling like their contribution isn't valued. Now I'm getting this drawing and I'm like, what the hell? Like, you don't value what I'm able to contribute. And right. I've just lost my chance to make a meaningful contribution. So, and similar, product manager can feel the same way. The designer's like, no, I got this. I don't want anything from you. So I think that that's a really important thing. And I just lost my second thought. So never mind.
Okay. All right. Let's shift gears just a little bit here. So on the topic of collaboration, do you encourage collaboration? And in particular, the question here is around brainstorming with stakeholders.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And
I feel like all my answers are, it depends. I really
right.
like the Google Venture Sprint book, right? The kind of the very structured brainstorming. And if you read that book, I think he even talks about like we do all this brainstorming, but nothing ever came out of it. And I think it's useful. Brainstorming by itself, with especially with stakeholders, is useful just to help them. Two things. One is to help them understand, like, oh, this is kind of hard, like figuring out what goes on the screen. It's actually not something anybody could do. And two, it helps the designer see what kind of baked in expectations are kind of in their head that maybe they haven't explained already. So I think that can be really useful. The risk is that it feels fruitless in the end, unless you're really explicit about, here's what we learned from this, and we're not going to use your drawings, but we understand that you have this assumption or expectation. So using the Google Venture Sprint, and we really at Design Map have started to like slice that up and say, we're just going to take like Tuesday and do that, or we're just going to take this thing and that thing and that thing and put it together. So, which forces you to be pretty rigorous about what you're accomplishing and why. I like that better.
Yeah.
It's really just a question of clarity of goal and then making sure that you accomplish it.
Yeah. Yep. And right on. And look, I think that, again, just to share a little bit, in my experience, when you do involve stakeholders in those conversations, and the end result, whether it's a design or an interface or a workflow or some kind of a decision, reflects their input, even if it's a fraction of their input. They see a fingerprint in the work, they advocate for it, they defend it, they're bought into it. There's a much greater ownership of the work by that stakeholder, and that can be very valuable, particularly in large organizations where there's a lot of politics and somebody else might have a different agenda. So I've seen that work well. There's a follow-up here that I think is really relevant to this conversation as well. So let me ask it and see what you think. So when you do kind of get these folks into these types of, these stakeholders, these leaders into these types of meetings, brainstorming sessions, et cetera, collaborative sessions, what are some interview techniques, or what are some techniques that can be used with these leaders to get them to participate, to get them to be a good part in this?
So I'm imagining this is being asked by a designer who has a leader that doesn't participate, like they do these things and they just show up but they don't participate.
Right.
Yeah, so I think again, being like really specific about what you're trying to accomplish. So now we need everybody to do X and Y, right? A very open-ended brainstorming session I would only have with a team like what you described before, Jeff, where you say like, oh, we all knew each other, we've been working together for months, but in an area where there's a bunch of stakeholders, I don't work with them that much, this is a one-off thing, like I would be very structured with my brainstorming session, like what I'm trying to accomplish, what are we going to do. Maybe we change, maybe we get in the middle of it and we're like, that didn't work, like let's do this other thing, but being really, really structured about it. And part of that structure is, okay, everybody, do crazy eights and, fold your piece of paper in eights and draw the same idea 8 different ways. Mm-hmm. And I have been in session where like the CEO is there and he just wasn't doing it. The nice thing about being a consultant is I can kind of be the asshole in the room and say like,
right.
So Joe, we'll call him Joe, I noticed that you're not doing it. And he says, well, I've already worked on this forever. I don't need to, And the best you can do is kind of call him on it. Like, so create structure so there's not an easy way out. And then if there's only a hard way out and they're just not participating, then I think you should go ahead and call them on it. And then not call them on it in a mean way, but just say, we would love your input here. And then I would follow up and say, I think it's really counterproductive for those folks to show up in a meeting and then not participate. It shows, it can show lots of things, none of which are particularly good. So I know you're super busy. I really appreciate you coming. I think in the future, it's kind of a struggle if you're not participating. You can imagine how others might see that. Next time I would love for you to come if you can be all in. And if not, then maybe your time is better spent answering the emails that you were answering in the meeting anyway, because it kind of detracts from the energy in the room, or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I've been there. I've walked into rooms where there's certainly been a couple of people that are like this.
Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
Like I'm not participating no matter what you do. And look, you try to get them to buy in at a certain point, but afterwards there should be a conversation, right? Maybe don't embarrass them in front of everybody else. Right. But, okay, we have a few more minutes, and there's a few more questions.
Jeff,
I really want to.
One more thing. I did remember what I was thinking of about the overlap between product managers and designers.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that we like to do is a pre-mortem, and that I think this kind of standard pre-mortem is, let's imagine this worked really well. What happened? Let's imagine it was a complete disaster. What happened? You talk through these things. But another way that I learned to do this was to list everybody. Basically make a matrix, list the team members, their title, and their role and responsibilities, and then hopes and fears. And the role and responsibilities thing is really helpful, because then if the product manager, if you haven't worked with them before and they say, part of what I'll be doing is making wireframes, or, the designer says part of what I'll be doing is writing requirements, then you can get it out on the table in the pre-mortem, which is way easier. Just like saying, don't give me feedback on typos. It's way easier to have that conversation before somebody's done something. So that's another way to address the overlap between product managers and designers in projects. Just get it on the table in the beginning.
Got it.
Okay.
Awesome.
I know. Next question.
Cool. I want to get there's a couple good ones in here. I'm hoping to get before the top of the hour. So I suspect I know the background behind this one, but the question here is, in your experience, has it helped to have user testing and or user research data to back up design decisions? And my suspicion is that the question here is a little bit based on people dismissing qualitative research as anecdotal, you didn't do it right, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So user testing, so qualitative data to back up design decisions.
Yeah. Sure. So even the word data, like if that is truly the background, even the word data might cause somebody who's really quantitatively oriented to be like, don't even call it data. Like, get the person there if at all possible, which I'm guessing it isn't. So certainly it uses quantitative information to back up, qualitative information findings to back up decisions. And there's a certain point in the process where that's all you have. You can't do it quantitatively. And so if I can, I get the person there. If I can't get the person there, I send them video clips, right? Which is pretty easy to do. And that is way more poignant and impactful than any report with data or sticky notes or whatever, right? It's because it's a human thing. And I certainly have seen that. I've been in labs in the olden days with engineers where they're like, oh, where did you get this guy? When the first guy comes in, and then by the third guy, they're like, okay, these are people. They're not stupid. They're getting frustrated. Okay, we'll change it. Yep.
Cool. Hey, I want to get one more in before we finish. I think this one's really interesting. So how do you help convey the importance of continuing good design throughout a product's life? So the person here is asking specifically, we've seen a large investment during a large build or a rebuild, but then we see the perceived importance and the funding all but disappear when those same products hit a run state, sort of a maintenance state. So how do you advocate for design over the entire product life cycle? Life cycle.
I mean, I think it sounds like that's big enough that I think I would look back at the revenue from the product. Mm-hmm. And there's also often costs associated, like there's call center costs, there's maybe the sales team. So maybe you release this thing and by the end of a year, a competitor has released something else and the sales team is struggling in their demos. So I think I would look for business data from elsewhere. So revenue, sales, engineering, spending, if the engineers are doing design, if you're paying engineers to do design, that is not cheaper than paying designers to do design.
Right.
And the end product is not as good. So I kind of look around the edges for revenue or cost centers, and then use that to argue to keep the support, and hopefully have that be part of the conversation when you're designing it in the beginning. Like, this isn't just, we don't burn this on a CD-ROM and then we're done with it. Those days are over. So what are we going to do with this thing? What kind of revenue do we hope to have from it going forward?
Yeah. Yeah, this is one of those times where one of the pithy Jeff Patton sayings come in really handy. He always says, if you don't have engineers, you're not going to get code. But if you don't have designers, you're still going to get design.
Yeah.
And sadly, it's not going to be good design. Audrey, thank you. Look, we're pretty much at the top of the hour now. I know that as soon as we hit the top of the hour, people are just going to go to their next meeting. So thank you so much for spending the time and sharing your knowledge with us. This was fantastic. We've recorded this, so it'll be up on the Sense and Respond Press YouTube channel in about a week or so. Audrey's book, What CEOs Need to Know About Design, will be out later this year. If you go to senseandrespondpress.com, you can find out all about it and others. Thanks so much for joining us, Audrey. A pleasure as always. And we'll see everybody next time. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Have a good night.
Thanks, folks. Have a great day.
Have a good night later.
Yeah. Take care. Bye.
Bye.